Welcome to the Meat and Potatoes podcast. Today we're here with Pat Jones, who is the CEO of the Women's Leadership Institute. How are you, Pat?
I'm well, thank you, Garrett.
Thank you for joining us all the way from St. George.
Yes, it's a 4-hour drive, but it's getting faster and faster for me.
Good.
Been doing that for about 2.5 years now.
Yep. You got the speed traps figured out?
Yes, I do.
We'll just delete that part of it. I'm kidding. Well, we're going to have a fun conversation about your role as the leader of the Women's Leadership Institute. And then I'm sure we'll get into your career and your overall philosophies on kind of the mission of your life, at least at this point, of like helping men and women understand each other and how they think differently. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. It's part of our mission to help educate people about the complementary differences of men and women and how women can provide additive value for companies and homes and communities.
Perfect. Let's start with the Women's Leadership Institute. Where did the idea come from? How long has it been around? Kind of the founding story.
The founding story is that I had been a business owner for many years. I was in the qualitative and quantitative research business with Dan Jones and Associates, helped found that company and was the president and co-founder of that company and became fairly well known in qualitative research. So I traveled all over the country conducting focus groups, one-on-one interviews, quantitative research studies for just about every industry you can think of, from heavy equipment and mining to ice cream and perfume and, all kinds of different things. It was an amazing career. And so I got to know a lot of the business leaders in our state and in our different communities in the state. And they would hire me to help understand what the message ought to be with their products and services. I worked a lot with ad agencies and so forth. We sold our company in 2010. We started in 1980, so a long run there.
Good run.
And we sold it to the Cicero Group. They asked me to stay on for 5 years as an employee contract and to help them with their qualitative research. So that ended in the end of 2014. So 2015 January is really when I ended that. I'd also run for political office and served in the State House for 6 years from 2000 to 2006, and then ran for the Senate and served there for 2 terms, 8 years. And so served 14 years in the state legislature. So I had a business and a political background. I retired from the Senate because we were moving, and that was the end of 2014 also. So both of those things were coming to a close in my life. I was turning 65 at the very same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really thought I was retiring. Most people retire at that age.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was called by some of our key business leaders and asked to run the Women's Leadership Institute. And the message to me was, Pat, we are really struggling to attract and retain talent in the state of Utah, partly because of the perception that people have of the women in the state of Utah. It's harming our ability to really grow the state, and we're doing really well, but we have some areas where we need to address. One is the lack of numbers of women in politics, the lack of numbers of women in senior level, the lack of women on boards, and we have a gender pay gap that's quite wide in the state. And so they asked me, really Scott Anderson from Zions Bank, who I'd done a lot of research for. So we became, good friends. He knows everyone.
Yeah.
And a great visionary also. He also cited a recent article in the New York Post that was titled 5 Places Women Should Not Spend Their Travel Dollars. And those places were Turkey, Indonesia, El Salvador, Saudi Arabia, and Utah. And I think that got burr up their saddle, frankly. Sure. They were, I think our business leaders were unhappy with that and wanted to change it. And so my mission was to elevate women in those areas in senior level, to look at the retention rate, look at politics, to get women in politics. And it seemed to be a great merging of my experience for so many years, and I couldn't turn it down. It was an amazing opportunity for me. Scott said that he would fund us for 2 years. I'd have a full-time assistant, and I would have an office in the Salt Lake Chamber. I have a beautiful office downtown.
Yeah.
And so that was 8.5 years ago. And this has been the most wonderful journey for me. to work with men and women. And Garrett, one of the things that I would say that has made us so effective in what we're doing is our message is to men as much to women. Half of our board is men. These are men that are highly influential in our state and understand the passion and the value of women in senior level. And they just need a kind of a conduit to share that news. And so men are really an important part of our success. We don't blame or shame men. We believe that men are allies and advocates of women. And in fact, I have so many great stories of wonderful men who are leading companies. They're seeing cultural change within their company.
Yeah. What a career. And what a fun, way to like gather all these friends and all this information. You mentioned ice cream and perfume and mining all in the same sentence.
Yes.
It really probably opens up your mind to why you're such a good fit for this role of like, it's good. You got to listen to people. You got to understand where they're coming from.
Yes.
And you might think like this group over here has zero to do with this group over here, but in reality, there's a lot of parallels.
There are, and it's always about relationships. The Women's Leadership Institute, we have what we call the Elevate Her Challenge, and that's one of the first things I did. Having been in market research, I knew you need a product.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to Massachusetts. Their governor then was Deval Patrick,
Mm-hmm.
and he had started a corporate challenge about 6 months earlier called Getting to More. And they shared everything with me. It was all based on research. And some of the tenets in that was similar to our mission that I had just been asked to do. I mean, I'd never run a nonprofit before. I didn't know where to start. It was a big charge
Yeah.
to say, let's change this. This is changing culture. And it's not just one culture, it's many cultures within businesses. So we are business led. The Women's Leadership Institute is business led. We're a 501c3. We believe that men are allies and advocates of women. We're working together.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have complementary differences. And that's what I love doing is helping men and women understand what those complementary differences are and how to value them equally. And that's been so fun.
Yeah. What a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
Good for you. And the thing with like politics, you obviously had a successful run in the House and the Senate here locally. By my math, you need women and men to vote for you if you're going to get elected, right?
Yes.
Whether you're, Senator Warren or Donald Trump, they both have both people voting for them, right? And if you can't get that, then you'll never win. But I love the fact that there's no like lines drawn in the sand with you guys and your group, because sometimes it seems like, we're going to draw this line in the sand. And then you know what happens after that.
Well,
line's drawn.
I love politics, and it makes me sad when I see, especially women who don't want to be involved.
Yeah.
Because one of the trainings that I do is I train women to run for political office and have done so for 8.5 years now. But it's really important if you really want to make change, you have to be at the table making policy or helping make policy and understanding and helping decide where the money goes. That's where the power is. So when women tell me, well, I don't want to get into politics, but I want to influence, I want to make change over here.
Yeah.
I would say running, even if you don't win, running for political office is the best leadership development you can have.
Yeah.
Because think about it. You have to be able to speak in public, which a lot of us are afraid to do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You have to know how to write, problem solve. Critical thinking skills are important, persuasion, and there are many more. But you think about those skills. Those are the skills that companies are looking for in their employees. So it helps you at home, it helps you in your career. If you have one outside the home, there's so many ways that running for office will help you. Plus, when you put your hat in the ring, people automatically see you as a leader.
Yeah.
And they don't even know what office you ran for if you won. I have people still saying, are you still in the Senate? And this was like 6 years ago. I retired.
Yeah.
So people don't really pay attention, but they know that you were somehow connected to that.
Yeah.
And they put you in a different class of leadership.
Yeah. I agree 100%. Win, lose, or draw, it's like well worth it. And you can't complain anymore, right? Because you can say, well, I want to do this and I want to do that. Well, there's a system for it. And, eventually, like if you keep throwing your hat in the ring, you will almost always win at some point. You might have to
Depends.
be like, it might take longer than what you would have liked, because you're usually learning along the way of like, all right, that was the wrong approach.
Well, I learned how important it is to have a woman's voice
Yeah.
because there are so few women in our legislature where I was. We're seeing more women run and win in our municipal races.
Yeah.
But where a lot of the power is statewide, of course, is in the state legislature. And especially when I was in the Senate, I was oftentimes the only woman on a committee.
Yeah.
And if you have like gun bills or um, environmental policies that are being considered, healthcare, education, those are things that women really care about. Men do too.
Yeah.
But there's a gap. We did polling for years. And so we used to measure those things all of the time. I knew that women felt differently about those issues than men do.
Yeah.
And so I always felt this responsibility on my shoulders that I was representing a lot of the women out there.
Yeah.
And we need a women's voice. When I was on the law enforcement committee, most of the gun bills would come through that committee. And I seemed to be the only one that would ask questions. And otherwise, it'd be pretty much rubber stamped. And so women tend to think differently about those issues, but our brains are wired differently too.
Yeah. There's several roles in municipal, state, and federal that I wish were only available to women.
You want
Because
to cut out the man, do you?
there's a few where I'm like, I already know what that person, that dude, is going to think. And it doesn't line up with like a long-term future for whatever reason. This is just my opinion. Like the EPA, I wish was always under the tutelage of a woman, because I think they, to your point, think differently, and they
Yes.
think a little bit longer term, and they're way more inclusive. And again, just my opinion, but there are several where it's like, that's the wrong person in that job.
Yeah, it is interesting that some people see it as a stereotype that women and men. But when I ask audiences this question, and I do all of the time, I ask them, do men and women think differently? I think I've had one person over hundreds that have said, no, we don't. But 99% of the time, you'll have people agree that men and women think differently.
Yeah.
I like to study why. And I've worked with the Barbara Annis group, the gender intelligence group, who work with neuroscientists. I've read the male brain, female brain. We are wired differently. And women tend to use both hemispheres of their brain more interconnectively. And men tend to think front to back in their brains, which translated means that men, this is just one example. I've seen it over and over in my life, and maybe you have too, Garrett. But if there's a problem, say you're in a committee and there's a problem to be solved, men don't want to hear all the details of the backstory. Why are you giving me this? This is stuff that I don't want to really care about right now. Let's get to the issue. Let's solve it and move on to the next thing. I've seen that. Have you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And women, if maybe there's two or three, which is typical in a committee, usually not equal, but
Yeah.
Women tend to not speak up as quickly because guess why? We're processing this between our left and right brain. We're connecting these dots.
Hmm.
And sometimes it takes just a little bit longer to do that. And so men interpret that as women are lacking confidence. They don't want to speak up. They're fearful of saying the wrong thing, or maybe they don't even know the answer, which is worse.
Yeah.
When in fact, oftentimes women do have the answer. They're processing all of these different things like a pinball machine.
Hmm.
And oftentimes come up with a more complex, complete answer and more creative solutions.
Yeah.
And so having both of them, one's not better than the other, but having both working together in a complementary way is really helpful. It's helpful at home, but it's also helpful in business.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether you're running a big country or a municipality or like a 500 to 5,000 person business, all of what you just described is applicable.
Very applicable, whether you're a solo, everywhere, in all relationships, it's helpful to know that.
Yeah.
And so helping us understand what are the challenges that we face working with the opposite gender is really important. And understanding the brain and how we think differently is really helpful for companies too. I work with all kinds of organizations to help them elevate women. One of them in the last few years has been the University of Utah School of Dentistry. Now that seems a little off the wall, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Their dean at that time, about 5 years ago, Dean Hume, came from UCLA and came here, and he called me and he said, Pat, we've only got 2 women in our school of dentistry, and we know that women make great dentists, and we want more of them. And Utah, 93% of the dentists in Utah are men, by the way.
Yeah.
That's not true elsewhere. It's a great profession for women.
Yeah.
And so he called me. He says, we really want to change this. And I met with him several times. I have been on their board, and they have done specific things to have more women in their program. One of them was to incorporate women, female dentists, to interview prospective students, female students.
Hmm.
And that, over the years, that has really helped. So this year they graduated more women than men in their school of dentistry. So we're seeing a lot of change because it's intentional. These are men who are leading because they understand the value of gender difference. And it's been amazing.
I love it. I've been to male and female doctors. The female doctors are so much better. It's not even close. I've never been to a female dentist.
Yeah, I know most people haven't.
No, but the female doctors ask like 10 more questions.
Yeah. Have you ever purchased a car from a female?
No.
Okay, let's talk about
That'd
that
be
for a
much
minute.
better.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
Because another one of our groups that contacted me a little over a year ago was the Ken Garf Automotive Group. And Brett Hopkins is their CEO. And he called me and said, hey, Pat, we have only 20% women in our whole enterprise. Now, this Ken Garf has, I think, 45 or 50, I think it's growing on 60 now, car dealerships throughout the United States. It's much bigger than most people think.
Yeah.
And he said 20% of all of our employees are female, and most of them are in entry level receptionists and so forth. But he says we have 2 dealerships that are really killing it, really doing well, and they have 40% females. One of them's in California, one of them's in Orem. And he said, we really want to attract more females into our automotive group. How do we do it? So he says, will you come and present to our executive team? And which I did. So there were maybe 8 or 9 of them. And I presented a lot of this brain stuff about how men and women think differently, and what women are, what challenges they have working with men and men working with women, so that we can understand each other. And they loved it. And he called me and he said, can you come back next month and speak to our general managers? Which I did. And same thing. It was like, oh my gosh, this is so helpful. And then they said, well, how about presenting this to our whole enterprise in Palm Springs in April? Which I did. So I did this 3 times. And the reason I mention this is because I got an email shortly thereafter from their HR director, Joe Bernard is his name. And he sent a picture of this little girl that was, pushing a lawnmower, so her hands were way up above her head. She could hardly reach it. And him next to her, kind of gently guiding it. And he says, thank you for presenting. He says, I've heard you 3 times now present. And he said, I want to tell you this story. He says, I have a precocious 5-year-old daughter who asked me one day, Dad, how come you teach my older brothers to mow the lawn, but not me? And he says, normally I would have said to her, well, that's their job. You have other jobs probably in the house, something domestic, which is usually the case. He says, after hearing you 3 times about the value of women, regardless of their age, he said, I went out that day and bought a lightweight lawnmower, and we've been mowing the lawn for several weeks now. And he says, guess what? She mows straighter. She avoids the sprinklers. She gets up Saturday morning. She's really excited to mow the lawn.
Yeah.
And he says, I've been mowing the lawn with her for all of these weeks. And he said, I have this new appreciation and relationship with my daughter.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of lessons in that. This story I tell often because it never fails me. Yesterday I spoke at the Twila Chamber, and they had to pass the Kleenexes around because everybody can relate to this. Men can relate because it's like they usually have daughters or granddaughters or know a young female that they care about.
Yeah.
And women, the message for women there is, women are oftentimes don't express what they want. They're helpers for other people. Now, that could be a stereotype for some women, but generally that is true. Women tend to not think about what it is that I want and need, and then to communicate that to the right people. And so that's what that lesson, that little girl knew what she wanted and she told the right person. And guess what? Things changed for her. She got what she wanted. So there's a lot of sub messages in there for us,
Oh, yeah.
all of us, men and women.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you'll save a lot by not running over the sprinkler heads, which I ran over a lot of them.
I have too.
And I can remember my grandma looking at me and being like, how many times do I have to tell you?
Yeah. You're
Go
in a hurry.
around.
Well, you're thinking ahead. You're that linear thinking, right?
It's like, this is stupid. I want to go play baseball. So I'm going to go fast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so many great examples. Like if you ever, are in the Midwest in a farm, there's a lot of girls and women out there like checking the cows and like getting the hay in, right? And all of that stuff. Like it gets pretty democratic when there's like stuff to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the stereotype might be these farmers are like, oh, it's just the boys or the men's job. But like, at least in my anecdotal experience, not the case in a lot of instances because they don't break stuff as much, for one. And they're reliable, right? Like, the job needs to be done. And when it is done, we can all go and play and do whatever. But it's not rushed.
It isn't. And, we work with businesses. That's primarily our sweet spot. And there's so much data out there that show that when you elevate women in your company, or you have relatively, at least a critical mass, which is 30%, so 30 to 50% on your board, on your teams and things, that your numbers improve. There's a business case in spades on this. And so this is why a lot of businesses call our organization, the Women's Leadership Institute, because we do have some ways and proven, and they're all research based, and we don't charge people to take the Elevate Her Challenge. I mean, you don't have to provide numbers. It's all done internally. So it's not prescriptive.
Yeah.
And so the Elevate Her Challenge has been our tool that we have provided for companies it's a template for them to follow, and it's based on research. And the templates are to increase the percentage of women senior leadership, to look at your retention rate, to put women on your boards of directors, to monitor pay by gender, and to provide sponsorship and mentorship programs, and to encourage women to run for political office.
Yeah.
If you do all of those things, you're going to see and reap the benefits in spades for your company.
Absolutely. And I think most people would agree with that, right? So we're a nonprofit. You've mentioned, like, even after all that you've did in the for-profit and political realm, like nonprofits are kind of tricky because oftentimes there's not a roadmap and you're building the ship as you sell it. But one thing I do know is you can't scale, like you can't be at the Twilla Chamber and at Ken Garf and these other places at the same time, right? Yeah. So how do you guys as a team kind of get this to where it can scale, and it doesn't always have to be you the one presenting? How have you built your team and your product to kind of grow and scale?
Yes, well, that's a great question, and that's what we're working on right now, frankly. I think the first few years we were really putting together our product, which is our Elevate Her Challenge. We also started right out of the chute. I mean, I did, because I had just come out of the Senate. I knew all the players, and built the political development series, where we've trained almost 400 women to run for political office. It's nonpartisan, it's statewide, but we have programs where we do the training once a month, and that has been very successful. Then I developed the career development series, because I found so many women that were mid to senior level that were, quote, stuck in the middle, lacking opportunity, or in different reasons not being able to move up like they wanted to. Not all women want to be the CEO, and that's not what we're saying. We're saying be a leader wherever you are, be an influencer wherever you are. So this career development series started 6 years ago. It's 8 months long. We're sponsored once a month by a different company. This year we were at Instructure in January. We went to Pluralsight in February. Larry H. Miller Corporate the next month. Gail Miller spoke there. And And then we've been to Dominion Energy. So these great companies, there's of course others, Intermountain Healthcare. There's others that sponsor the women. We have 100 women in it this year. We had to cut it off.
Oh, wow.
And we bring in amazing, and these are all Elevator Challenge companies that sponsor women to attend to this, but we bring in amazing presenters talking about and training and developing women on leadership skills. And then these women, because we record all of them, review the recordings and take it back to their teams. And so this is a great way to scale it. Number one, it helps them learn and cement what they've learned in the class. But when you're teaching something, you really have to know it. And so that does it. It also helps them be seen as the leaders that they are by their teams. And so that has been a huge way to scale it. We're expanding this year. I'm working with the different chambers throughout the state of Utah, St. George to Logan. I was in Twilla yesterday, Vernal, so all over, where they will host their own cohorts and then log on when it's time for the presenters to present. And then they'll kind of band and build their own relationships in their own chambers. So these are, again, business led. So that's how we're scaling right now. But we're always thinking about scaling because it's successful.
Yeah.
This is a very successful model.
For sure. And you already have this advantage because it's kind of been a part of your DNA of like the data and the qualitative, even quantitative. I'm not very good at that. It's like, hey, was that fun? Did you learn something? Yeah. Like, cool. No surveys, nothing like that. How are you guys like tracking this? Because I assume it's a big part of what you guys are building on. Like, it's working. That's not. This is working really well.
Yeah.
Tweaks and improvements.
That's from day one. My board said, how do we measure success? And as a qualitative researcher, I was really pleased to hear my team say this ought to be a qualitative measurement, anecdotes and stories. And it's stories like I've told you. We don't ask for numbers from the people that take the Elevator Challenge. If we did, I think we would have fewer people interested, to be candid, because people don't like to share how many women. Most people most of them are men that I meet with, and they'll say, well, we have 55% of our employees are women, but they're not in leadership positions.
Yeah.
But that can't happen overnight. And what I like to do is inspire people about the value of gender diversity and why it's important to them, how the benefits benefit them and their company. And that's the best way, I believe, to convert people as to why this is important. It's not a number on a wall. It's not, it's not to make yourself, because we like companies that actually walk the talk.
Mm-hmm.
And we work with companies that actually walk the talk.
Yeah.
That's how you make change.
Yeah. I love it. Because those numbers on the wall are oftentimes not believed, or they're like kind of again, like that line in the sand of,
yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. I've just loved learning about how men and women think differently. And that has helped me communicate that and help communicate the value. The different parts of our brains are wired differently. Women tend to have better memories. So the last time you did something really bad was probably yesterday for you, Garrett.
Yeah.
But maybe for I don't know if you're married, but anyway, if there was a female in your life, she'll remember 25 years ago. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah.
It's like new details and you've completely forgotten about it. There's actually a reason for that. There is some science that says that women do have intuition. Female intuition is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
Women can read faces better than men can. So you walk into a room, we're walking into the same room. You're seeing people at tables, maybe at some sort of a conference. Women can immediately read the mood of the room, can read the faces. They can remember what kind of hairstyle they had.
Yeah.
Men are like, all they see is the chair. It's a place to sit down. It's just how we think. And it's not right or wrong or different. We're just different. We're complementary differences between us.
Yeah.
And to recognize that, the value of that. If you're a financial planner, think about this application in business and having that intuitive. If you're a car salesman, wouldn't a female car salesman be able to read, okay, who's going to buy and who isn't?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And they're underutilized. Women are underutilized. Their skills are.
Yeah. and especially in like the political sphere, where there is those nuances of body language, or like, why is he being a grump today? Versus like, oh, I'm gonna dig a little deeper and turn the screws on him a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
And it's just adversarial instead of like, again, complimentary.
When we used to do surveys with Dan Jones and Associates over the years, so it was years that we did this, and we would do surveys on just about every topic you can think of, whether it's education or healthcare, whatever, light rail at the time. What we found is a strong trend of men over 50 being the most negative subgroup, and women over 50 being the most positive subgroup.
Interesting.
When you hear about grumpy old men, now, not all men, I'm not saying that. There are a lot of men over 50 that are not that way.
Yeah.
But in the surveys on these things, that men tended to be more negative. In fact, it was so common that we had an acronym for it, CAVES, Citizens Against Virtually Everything. And they tended to be men over 50, just invariably.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that even nowadays, when you see the polls, that you see those subgroups, the same thing we saw. So it's understanding the why. I've always wanted to do a research study on why that is. I have some hypotheticals about why that is. But it is, and you see it. You know the men in your neighborhood. I know the men in mine. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just an attitude. And I have recently seen some national research study that showed that women, as soon as they hit 50, the line grows up in terms of happiness.
Yeah.
And men are the opposite. And I certainly see that.
Oh, for sure.
Why do you think that is? I'm going to ask you.
I know that's interesting because I will answer that. But one of the pieces of anecdotal research I like is, if you live a life like I do, like maybe like half redneck, half hippie, you're going to get invited to be a member of the NRA, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Greenpeace, all of them. And so you get the mailing stuff, and it's like, grumpy old guy on the lawn. Shirley wrote that piece of like, this is probably the end of times. Things are not looking good.
Mm-hmm.
Versus the other where it's like, look at what we've done. This is amazing. We're just getting started. And, like once you get to that point of maybe 50, you might think, man, I didn't accomplish what I set out to in life. And my kids are soft and weak. And man, that's my fault. And why did my wife remember what I said 4 months ago about that? And just like this compounding snowball of like negativity versus like the grandma is like, man, my grandkids are amazing, and look at my kids, they did okay in life, and oh, look at this rosy outlook for America or for the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just anecdotally, it's like, come on, grumpy old guy, go buy a boat, something like that, right? Like you still got a lot of tread on those tires.
Yeah. So you are my survey of one today, which is always a very small sample.
Yeah.
But I think you're right on. I think there's some other things too, but you see it also, don't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's like you're running into a buzzsaw if it's like 3 or 4, guys in their 70s. And it used to be kind of fun because they used to be like World War II veterans.
Yeah.
And they would have funny stories and stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Not so much now with like an 82-year-old.
Yeah.
It's just like, get off my lawn. And I'm like, man, look at what you've experienced.
Yeah. There's definitely exceptions to that.
Oh, tons.
I just recently got remarried in January. So my husband is totally the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And, he actually teaches leadership and ethics and talks about corporate love.
Yeah.
Leadership and love in business. And that's not spoken about much.
Yeah.
And just the importance of men, I think today, acknowledging they have feelings.
Yeah.
And, but I think so much of this, Garrett, in the workplace is understanding each other and being open. And this is why I love the Elevate Her Challenge. Is a lot of our companies that are Elevate Her Challenge companies are taking that and are bringing in small groups within their own companies and talking through it. They're asking their employees, where are we on these things? The leadership, the board membership, and, where should we focus? And it's opening up a new conversation internally
Yeah.
which is just absolutely it. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of men, for instance, who are afraid to compliment women on how they're dressed.
Yep.
They don't know whether they should open a door for a woman. And I've had men tell me, I've tried that, and women have just come down my neck for that.
Yeah.
And so women, we have a responsibility too. I think our responsibility is to, if we are offended by something that is said that is usually not intentional, maybe it's sexist to us,
Yeah.
that we don't embarrass men in front of others, that
Yeah.
we take them aside and say, here's what I wish you would have said, or this is how it landed on me.
Yeah.
And let's just educate each other.
Yeah.
That's what men appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I like to do.
Absolutely.
And as women, we, I think, need to be good mentors to our sisters, to the young women coming up. Help them understand that wearing clothing that is really not appropriate for work, that it doesn't do them any favors by doing that. People don't take them seriously. Men are not willing and shouldn't be willing to say those things. Maybe they should, but
Yeah.
they aren't. And women can. We can help our younger, maybe sometimes same age women that
Yeah.
we work with. So there's just different roles, but I think we need a new openness. We need honesty and respect. Those things working together in our workplaces, in our homes, will be a winning strategy for all of us.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I would love to keep this conversation going, and maybe we can every year or so, get updates, or maybe even every 6 months, because what you guys are doing is big. You're interacting with thousands of people, thousands of organizations. It is very important, because you could not care about anything that we just said, but you could care about the bottom line of your company. And I think you have enough anecdotal and qualitative and quantitative research that shows if you do this, your bottom line will go up, right? Whether you believe all the stuff we've just been talking about or not. But I think most people would line up with your guys' vision and philosophies, and they would love to learn more. So what's the best way people can support the Women's Leadership Institute? How can they get involved with Elevate Her? Quickest way to get in your guys' funnel of happiness.
Sure. Our website is www.wliut.com. So Women's Leadership Institute of Utah, WLIUT.com is the best way. We have a great website. It gives you information, even on our golf program, our LPGA that we're involved in.
Yeah.
We have a Rising Leaders series too for entry-level women. We're doing a lot of things where we're seeing the choke points. We're helping to enhance those and relieve those choke points for women and men. This is about women and men.
Yeah. I love it. So in 100 years, the conversation should be different, right?
We're hoping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pat. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Garrett.
Yeah.